All right, welcome everyone to the NEWA Quality Control Manager webinar. Keith Eggleston with the Northeast Regional Climate Center is going to be talking to us today about a project that we've been working on over the past year and a half. All the content he's going to be covering today is made possible through work funded by the USDA grant number 2017-70006-27210 at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So Keith, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Let's see, I'm going to be talking about quality control today, and one of the first lines that we have for quality control is these emails that should look familiar to the people that are state coordinators, and I think most of the people on the line today are state coordinators. What this is you get a list of all the stations in your state, and it's broken down into three categories. There's ones in the middle, which is hopefully where the bulk of your stations are going to be. These are the stations that have reported sometime in the last 24 hours. Above that is a list of stations that have not reported in the last 24 hours. Hopefully it's just due to a brief outage, a communication error, or the station might be down for repairs, something like that. After
Keith,
about 21 days.
Keith,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to interrupt. I'm not sure that I have ever seen this report.
Okay, so I will make sure that you get added to the list. Yep, we'll make sure that we get the list going to you with the stations for your state.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
So good. And the group at the top here is the ones that haven't reported in the last day, but and once they have not reported for 21 days, they should move into the bottom category down here, which is the inactive stations. These are the stations that might be out for maintenance. They might have some kind of a problem that they're working on correcting. They might have closed the station down for the winter. Any number of reasons that they might be inactive. So those are listed at the bottom. Usually if a station starts reporting again, we should pick that up and they get moved back to active status. But when you get the email, if you see a station at the bottom that you know should be active, let us know and we'll make sure we do get it back onto active status. And there is actually a fourth category of stations. Those are stations that are disconnected. These are ones that we don't expect to be recording data ever again. The station is broken down, the owner doesn't want to replace it, something like that. So if you see stations that show up as being inactive down here, and you know that they're actually disconnected, that's another thing that you should notify us of so we can get them off the list altogether and they won't show up down here either. So that's kind of our first line of defense. This is just lets you know whether a station is active or not and whether it has been missing data. So what we move on to now is our new project, which is our quality control program here. So instead of just looking to see if a station is active or not, we're looking at the actual data and trying to catch the data that are bad. The data can be kind of marginal, so it might be kind of on the borderline of we can't decide if it's good or bad. So we try to err on not flagging a station as being bad if it is kind of marginal. If we flag a station, the data are usually actually bad and not kind of borderline. So we try not to overwhelm you with too many reports of stations that are kind of on the borderline, just to let you know if the data is really good or really bad. So we have a program that we run every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and it looks at the data over the last 15 days and goes through every hour for every station and makes some checks to try to find the stations that are having problems. There are 4 variables that we're looking at now: relative humidity, temperature, solar radiation, and precipitation. These are the ones that are used the most in the models that we have running on the NEWA webpage. We might add some checks later on for things like leaf wetness and wind speed, but to get started out, we're looking at these 4 major variables. So when you click on one of these variables, like we'll click on relative humidity, it will give you a list of all the stations that had some kind of problems during the last 15 days. The stations are ordered in state order, and then all the stations within that state with their station ID. If there are more than 25 stations, you can continue on to the next page here by clicking the next button. And so there's the other ones that had relative humidity problems during this period. So you can go back and forth. If you have a larger screen, you can change the number of rows here. So you can make it larger, perhaps fit all of them onto one page depending on how big your screen is. We'll set this back down to 25 for now.
Keith, can I ask a question? So actually, go ahead, because you're probably going to answer this question before I ask it, so I'll wait. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so that's how you can display what's on the page. And as you go across the categories here, you can click on the category header to resort the data in that column. So we already have it sorted by state. If we want to sort by station ID for some reason, we can click on that. It'll sort descending order, click again in ascending order. So you can click on those columns to change the sorting. The next column here is the number of days that have flagged data during that period. So it might be 1 hour during that day, it might be 24 hours in the day, but the number of days that had some kind of problem with data of this type. So we're looking at relative humidity. Again, we can click on that column heading to sort, so we can right away see the days that had, or the stations that had problems every day. And as you move down through, you can see that there are some that just had problems on 1 or 2 days. So that's any type of problem that was experienced during the day, number of days. The next 2 columns are the number of hours where there were problems where the values were out of range. And I'll define a little bit later what out of range means, but just to continue on a kind of a tour of the page here, here again you can sort that column, or you can sort that column from lowest to highest, and clicking again highest to lowest. And then hours where there's a difference between this station and nearby stations. And again, I'll give more details on that, but just to show you that those can be sorted again. And note that now we're looking at number of hours total during that 15 days, not number of days as in the first column here. And another feature before we actually get into the guts of this here is you can use these the small gray boxes below the headings to do some filtering. So if we only wanted to look at stations in, let's say, New Hampshire, we can type in that abbreviation and it will filter out just those stations. So if you don't care about the other states, you only want your state, you can just narrow this down right away to the state that you're interested in. If you wanted to search for a particular ID, you could do that as well. And you can also filter out the stations that don't have many problems. Like if you don't care if they only have 6 or 7 days of problems, you're only interested in ones that have more than 7 days, you can type in a 7 here, and it will give you, it will take out all the values below that. So you only have the stations remaining that had 7 days with problems. And you can do that with all the other columns as well. So you can filter out your results a little bit. If you're getting, if you're kind of overwhelmed by the number of problems, you can just find the worst offenders. So that's a quick tour of how to navigate around this page. So let's start looking at the data that's actually contained here. If we look at stations that have a lot of relative humidity problems. Here's one in New York. If you click anywhere on that row, down below the table, it will give you a listing of all the hours that had a problem. So this was Butler Tree Crisp in New York. There were 360 hours that had problems, and there's only 360 hours in that period. So every hour had a problem, and you can see why. So this station, here's the first day in the period that we're looking at, January 6th. We see that the problem is that it's below the allowable range, and it gives you the hour, the value for that station for with its station ID up here. When you get into the other category of problems here where it's comparing against nearby stations, it will give you the data for those nearby stations. And it looks at an airport station and another NEWA station. So it will give you the actual value for that station. If it's appropriate, it will give you the nearby stations. And as we scroll down here, you can see that for every hour, for every day for this station, the relative humidity is 0. So there's definitely a problem there. Hopefully the owner could be contacted and let him know that there's a problem, and he can either see if there's a problem with the station that he's able to take care of, or if it needs to be sent back to Rainwise to have some repairs done there. So this is a good time of the season to be looking at the QC tool to try to get some of these problems corrected before we get into the growing season. So what is this range check that we're doing? For each of the variables, we have an allowable range that the data has to fall in. If it falls outside of that range, then it's flagged as being bad. And the ranges are extremely broad. So if there is a problem, it's definitely some kind of problem, not just a extraneous value. So for relative humidity, the allowable range that we have is from 1% to 100%. If it's more than 100%, that's can't happen, and 0% can't happen either. So so we have a very broad range there from 1 to 100 for relative humidity. For temperature, here's a station that's having below range problems. You can see that it's -67. For temperature, again, the range is very broad. It's from the all-time low temperature record for that station to the all-time high temperature record for that station. So very broad range. This -67 down in North Carolina is definitely outside of the allowable range. Here's another station in Virginia also showing that -67. If we contacted Rainwise, they might be able to tell us why that particular value of -67 is showing up. It might indicate to them some kind of a problem that they're having when it's at that constant value for such a long period of time.
Keith, so I've got a question on that. So,
okay.
So the all-time low or high for that station from the time that it went online?
No, it's the all-time record low and high for the entire state.
Oh, state. I thought you said
yep.
Station.
Okay. I might have misspoken there, but yeah, it is the all-time record high or low for the entire state.
Okay, thank you.
So that's why it is such a broad range, because it's for the entire state. For solar radiation, we have a range here. Here's one that is exceeded a lot. Our range there is between, well, the allowable range is between 0 and 100 Langleys per hour. So here we can see that for this station, it had unbelievably high values for most hours of the day. It's not every hour. There are some that fell inside the allowable range, but these are the ones that fell outside of it. And some of these you can see are overnight hours as well. So you've got stations here or hours here with over 140 Langleys in the middle of the night. So our range there is from 0 to 100. And for precipitation, we probably don't have any that fall into here. Nope, there are none that fell into this range. The range here is less than 0, which you shouldn't be able to get from a tipping bucket rain gauge, or more than the state record for the entire state for the period of record. So that's a very high value, not likely to be exceeded unless there is a really bad problem with the station. So that's the data that's showing up in these hours with a range above or below those very broad limits. So those are definite problems. The next category of problems is when stations differ from the nearby stations. So if we look back to relative humidity again, let's look at some state, let's see, this one right here, a station in Vermont. So we're looking at relative humidity. There were a couple of days here where there were a number of hours that were flagged. Here's in the column here under VDU is data that was recorded by that station. The next column is the station that is closest to it, that is an airport station. So this is for Keene, Vermont, is the closest airport station. And VPU, I think might be Putney, Vermont, is the closest NEWA station. So we always do a comparison to the closest airport and the closest NEWA station. And for relative humidity, if this station differs by more than 50 from either of the nearby stations, then it is flagged as possibly being an error. These aren't quite as definitive as the range errors. There could be a problem that maybe the station that we're comparing to might have bad data, and so you're being flagged for the wrong reason here. But that's why we show two stations here, a NEWA station and the airport, so you can see that if they differ from both of those, then there's more likely a problem at that particular station. So this station is quite a bit lower than the nearby stations. It's especially a lot lower than the airport station at Keene. So these are values that might indicate that there could be a problem. You would probably want to go to the NEWA hourly data lister. Click to the NEWA webpage here. We can go down to hourly data here. And let's see, we were looking at Dummerston for the 8th. So if we go down to Vermont here, go to Dummerston, and let's see, click here. And if we go down to the 8th, okay, so we were seeing some values here on the 8th that were pretty low. And you can see as you scroll through here that actually all the values are looking to be kind of on the low side. So it might be something you want to check into. You might want to look at this station a little more closely to see if you think there's a problem. It might be out of calibration and would need to be sent back to RainWise to get calibrated. So these are the hours that differ by more than 50 from the nearby stations. There might be others that were pretty close to that threshold. They might be like 40% off or 30% off. These are the ones that are off by a lot more. So that's what we see for relative humidity. Let's see, we look over to temperature now. Again, we're comparing temperature to nearby stations, and we do have an extra check here on temperature as well. So for temperature, we're looking at stations that differ by more than 10 degrees from the nearby stations. So for this particular station that we're looking at, Kalkaska, Michigan, it's comparing it to an airport station and another NEWA station again. So you can see that it is differing by more than 10 degrees for these particular hours. And the other bit of information that we give you over here in the final column is what our gridded temperature data is saying the temperature should be for that day. Now our gridded data is only daily, and we have the maximum and minimum temperature based on our gridded data. And so it should tell you what the max and min should be for that station on that particular day. It's only daily, so it can't look and get a gridded value hour by hour. So here it's saying that the low temperature for that day from the grid is -1. So it gives you a kind of another point of reference here. So for this station, you can see that it is cooler than the airport station by a fair amount, and it is cooler than the closest NEWA station, again by a fair amount. But the gridded data is saying that the temperature should be, the low temperature for the day should be around -1. So that isn't looking quite so bad. So this gridded data does give you a little bit more, an additional point of reference here that you could make a judgment on whether you think that data is bad or not, whether the station needs to be looked at, sent in, or if the data is probably okay. So again, the temperature, we're looking for 10 degrees difference from the neighboring stations, and the gridded data is just provided as additional information for you in making a decision about the validity of the data. So that was temperature. We can look at solar radiation now and find a station here that is having some problems. So we're looking for solar radiation that it is more than 25 Langleys different from the nearby stations. So this station here in South Burlington, Vermont, has a lot of zero values, where the nearby stations are saying that there is good data. At this time of year, it might be a little bit more difficult. You could have the sensor covered with snow. So there could be other problems that you wouldn't see during the summer. But this would indicate to me that there is some kind of a problem with the solar radiation. Again, you might want to look at the NEWA lister. So if we want to see the January 7th at South Burlington, Vermont. Okay. South Burlington. And go down to 7th is where we are looking at in particular, but you can, if you look at the solar radiation column here, you can see that it is consistently 0 right on all the way through here, through the entire month. So the QC viewer, since it requires it to be 25 Langleys different, if the actual value is around 25 and it's reporting 0, it's not going to be flagged. But these zeros would indicate that there is a problem there, and they definitely need to have their solar radiation data cleared up. Either take a look to see if the sensor is disconnected, or again, it might have to be replaced, sent into RainWise and replaced. So that's some solar radiation that is out of range. Here's another station where there were some hours where the solar radiation appeared to be too high. You would have to make a determination on whether or not you think there's a problem. It's only a few hours in the last 15 days, so you might want to look to see if there are other hours that maybe just missed that 25 Langley difference threshold to see if the station is consistently reporting too high. And for precipitation, during the winter with tipping buckets that aren't heated, you're probably going to see a lot of days flag that there actually isn't a problem because we have snow falling into the gauge and it has to wait until temperatures warm up before it starts melting and falling into the gauge, or it gets blown out of the gauge completely. So there's all kinds of problems with snow. So you are going to see problems during the winter that you don't have to worry about too much. But during the summertime, we do see a lot of problems with rain gauges getting clogged. So you might see a number of values that where the rain gauge is reading 0, but there should be some rain there. Let's look at a different station here. See if we have. Oh yeah, we aren't getting any reports with nearby stations reporting. So we aren't seeing the comparison to the nearby ones, but we are seeing what the gridded data is, and here we have the grid. Again, it's showing the amount of precipitation for the entire day. So we don't know what hours that fell during, but we know that there should be a total of around 0.09 inches of precip for that entire day, and we're not seeing that at the station, so that's why it's getting flagged as having some problems. Yeah, I'm not sure why we're not seeing the nearby stations here, but oh yeah, I know why we aren't, because it's a big difference. Nearby stations have to be more than 2 inches different from the station that you're looking at. So yeah, 2-inch difference is pretty big. But we are comparing to the grid as well. Since precipitation is so variable, your nearby stations might not be as good a thing to compare to as to the grid. If the grid is reporting 0.05 inches of precipitation or more, and the NEWA station is reporting 0, then that is flagged as being an error. That's what we're seeing all through here. And if there is precipitation being recorded by the NEWA station, but the amount for the day differs by more than 0.05 inches from the gridded value, then that is being flagged as well. So the only comparison that we're seeing results from here for all these stations is comparing it to the gridded data, and I think that all the problems are because of the frozen precipitation not falling into the gauge. We do see the station did have 1 hour where there was a little bit of precipitation. The grid thought that there should have been a lot more for that day. So those are the errors that we are checking for, how you can look at a station and get more information. Hopefully you'll be able to use this information to get in touch with the station owner and let them know that there's a problem, and hopefully they can get it fixed up before the growing season gets underway. We have this running operationally now. The program runs every Monday morning, and the results are available to you through the web page. I didn't give you the URL of the web page at the beginning of the talk here. It's on a test server right now, and that is at squall2, so squall2.nrcc.cornell.edu/NEWA-QC-viewer. When it's fully out of the beta stage, then we'll probably put it on a server with a different name, but at least the beta version here is available for you. You can test it out, and we would really like comments on it, things that you would like to see changed, things that you like, things that you don't like. Let us know, and we're still working on this, and we'll try to incorporate your suggestions into the final product. But it is certainly at a state right now where you're able to use it, start evaluating stations, and try to get the data cleaned up a little bit. One thing that I'll show quickly, which is more for the future, and that is a data editor that we're going to have. So if we know that there is bad data and we want to fix it or eliminate it from the database, we can go in and clean it up. For instance, if we want to go to Buffalo, Minnesota, I know there was some questionable data there. So this is a NEWA station. This is for all of the data that we have, both daily and hourly. So if we go to January 8th, for our begin and end date, NEWA station, we want to look at relative humidity. So here was the hourly data, each hour for that day I selected, January 8th. You can see that between hour 7 and hour 10, there were some values that look really bad. The data around it appear okay, so I'm not sure exactly what the problem was here. But if we wanted to clean this up and get rid of that data, we could click on the questionable value. It'll show the original value, and then you can, if you know what it is, if you knew somehow that the actual value was 90, you could correct that. More likely, you would just come in here and you want to invalidate that data for each one of those hours. Click on the invalidate and add it to the queue. And down here is the queue of all the changes that you want to make. And once you're satisfied with those changes, you can send that off to the server and it will be removed from the database. So this isn't live yet, so those changes didn't actually get sent to the server, but just showing what the interface will look like in the future, where you can go in and clean up the data if you want to go that far. Another feature that isn't available for the NEWA stations right now, but is available for some of our other daily stations. I want to look here just to show this capability. Let's look at the period here. We've got a few days for our station here in Ithaca, and let's say we want to look at minimum temperature. And if we think for some reason this particular value is questionable, there's another icon that shows up here for show map, and it will pop up a little map, and for all the nearby stations it will show what the value was at those stations to give you an aerial view to see if that data actually fits in with the surrounding stations or not. In this particular case, we can see that low of 28 does fit around in quite well with the stations in the surrounding area here. So just another way that you can make a decision before you decide whether you want to invalidate some data or not. So yeah, so this isn't operational right now, but I did want to give you a little bit of a preview of what that will look like. Something that we're working on, which is the next step. So in the viewer here, we can identify the stations and let the owner of the station know about the problem. In the future, once we've done that and we know that there's some bad data, we'll be able to remove it from the database. So that's the presentation for the day. I guess if there are any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Keith, I think I'll just jump in. One thing, if you could address, is the website security. I know we've talked at some point, perhaps, of having this be integrated with like a login because right now that URL is open, so it's certainly not something to share in presentations. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, well, this particular tool here, the Data Quality Control Manager, we don't intend to have that restricted at all because you can't really do any harm here. It's intended to be mainly for the state coordinators to keep an eye on the stations in their area. But if a grower wanted to, he could probably come in here and take a look at his station, see if there's problems. In fact, on the rewrite of the NEWA webpage, we think that we might integrate that into the page somehow, where if an owner comes in, it will show him any problems that the QC tool caught and let him know of those problems. So that's something we've been talking about a little bit. But more to the point, if a owner wanted to get in here and look at the data, I don't think there's any harm in that. When we start talking about the data editor, though, then there will definitely have to be security on there. There'll be some kind of login to even get into it. And after you submit changes and add them to the queue, they would have to be verified by someone before they actually went in there to prevent any kind of damage to the database. So there will be absolutely more security on the data editor tool, but for the QC viewer, I don't think that we will have to have security unless people think there's a problem, but they can't really do any harm here.
Great, thank you. Do folks have other questions?
So Keith, this will be someplace that we can link to. Right now, it's on this beta server, so we'd have to click in the website that you gave us earlier, but there will be a link to this on the NEWA site at some point?
I'm not sure. We hadn't planned on having a link to the website, but I guess that's up to Dan if he wanted to have it linked somewhere.
I think that would be like a group discussion, and we'll reach a point as we're going through the rebuild where I'll make a note of that and get group feedback.
Okay, and then one other question. I know that I've got a station that had some major issues last year, and I just never followed through with Dan, and consequently with you either, Keith, with a station that had a rain gauge that went bad. So I remember Dan sending me an email and wanted to know if we were all underwater in New Hampshire because we had over 200 inches of rain at that particular station. So for that, it was probably, I would say, several days or more worth of data. So it would just be eliminating that data completely and then just being able to triangulate with the nearby airport, or I guess I'm not sure what we do in that case.
Yeah, for right now, until the data editor is ready, you would just contact us and we can manually go in and remove values from the database. It's kind of a manually intensive job, so we try not to do that too much. But if there is a problem, we can go in there and manually remove it. And there is something in here which, if you knew that this particular station had bad data from, say, June 1st through, say, through July 31st, and it was bad precipitation. Okay, so if we know that like all this data for this entire period is bad, you don't have to go in hour by hour. There's a button at the top here, which means for that entire period, invalidate all of it. So,
okay.
Checks to make sure you really want to do that, and if you do, then it will add all of those hours to the queue, and then they'll be sent off, and all of those hours will be invalidated in the database.
All right, I can check back with Dan and perhaps with you, and then really kind of look at that particular instance and see if it's necessary to delete it or if we just leave it or what.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Keith, this is Tim Weigel out in Lake Erie.
Hi, Tim.
So how are you doing today?
Good.
So if you go in and invalidate that, does the system then run through and pull the information from sister stations to make it whole again? And is there a time frame where you have to do that so the system will do it for you?
Okay. Yeah, the system will do that on the fly. So as soon as this data is removed from the database, it will show up as missing, and all the programs will look to the sister station, and if that's not available, look to the forecast data to fill it in. So that will all happen automatically once the data are removed from the database.
Great, thanks.
Excellent. Good question, Tim.
Okay, and let's see, I can go into the chat here, and there, I put the URL for the page into the chat box in case, oh no, that's the editor. That's the wrong one. Let me get the right one here. Okay, so there's the URL for the editor if you want to look at that, but yeah, that's not really taking too many comments on that right now. The second one that I put in there is to the QC viewer. That's in the chat box. That's the one that we really want you to take a look at and start using.
Keith, I'm not seeing that show up in chat. Is that on my end, or is everyone else in the same boat?
Okay, yep, I see it was private now. Let me try again here. There, I think went to everyone that time.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. If there are no other questions right now, I'm going to conclude the webinar. Keith, thank you very much for doing this. I think it's going to be a very useful tool. I am recording this, so I'll make it available. Not sure if I'll put it on that public notes page that I've started or if I'll just share a private link with the coordinators in this group internally. But one way or another, we now have this as a resource. So thank you very much.
Actually, doing both might be a great idea, Dan.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome.
Keith. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.